What happens when the very system God established through Moses is wiped away? When there's no altar, no priesthood, and no sacrifice? Can a religion without its core still claim to walk in the footsteps of Moses? In 70 AD, the temple in Jerusalem, the beating heart of Jewish life, was reduced to rubble. But Judaism didn't disappear. Instead, something new emerged from the ruins. A Judaism no longer led by priests, but by teachers, no longer centered on the temple, but on rabbinic tradition. This is the story of how Judaism was reshaped, not by fire from heaven, but by fire from Rome. And the faith that arose looked nothing like what came before. If you are a new viewer, I invite you to subscribe. We reveal biblical and Christian truths like you have never seen before. So to understand what was lost in 70 AD, we must first understand what stood. In the first century, Judaism was a temple-centered faith. Everything, from daily worship to national identity, revolved around the sacred precincts of Jerusalem. At its heart stood the Second Temple, a magnificent structure of stone and gold, towering over the city like a crown. Here, the Levitical priesthood carried out the commands given to Moses on Sinai. Sacrifices were offered daily: morning and evening lambs, sin offerings, burnt offerings, peace offerings. Blood was sprinkled on the altar, incense was burned before the veil. The high priest entered the Holy of Holies once a year on Yom Kippur to make atonement for the people. 3 times a year, at Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles, Jews from every corner of the known world journeyed to Jerusalem, fulfilling the Torah's command to present themselves before the Lord. The city was not just a capital, it was the spiritual lifeblood of the nation. The temple was the one place on earth where heaven met earth, where God's presence dwelled among his people. Historian Flavius Josephus described it this way: "The temple in Jerusalem was the center not only of religion, but of national life." Despite theological divisions, all major Jewish sects held the temple in reverence. The Pharisees, known for their devotion to oral tradition and the law, saw themselves as guardians of moral and ritual purity. The Sadducees, largely drawn from the priestly elite, controlled temple worship and maintained strict adherence to the written Torah. The Essenes, disillusioned by the corruption they saw in the priesthood, withdrew to the wilderness, preparing for a coming apocalypse. The Zealots, fueled by nationalism, viewed Roman occupation as blasphemy and awaited a military messiah. 4 factions, 1 center. The temple unified them, spiritually, culturally, and theologically. Its destruction would not merely be a military loss, it would be the collapse of an entire way of life. In 70 AD, the unthinkable happened. Following years of mounting tension between the Jews and the Roman Empire, General Titus, son of Emperor Vespasian, led a brutal siege against Jerusalem. What began as a political rebellion spiraled into a nightmare of starvation, infighting, and destruction. The city was surrounded, food supplies cut off, factions within Jerusalem turned on each other. The streets ran with blood before the Romans even breached the walls. Families starved, corpses piled in the alleyways, children cried for bread, and there was none. And then the final blow came. Roman legions broke through, fires were set. The temple, once filled with the glory of God, was engulfed in flames. Josephus, an eyewitness, recorded the horror as follows: "The roar of the flames, streaming far and wide, mingled with the groans of the falling victims. The great altar was destroyed, the veil torn, the sacred vessels seized and carried away. The temple's golden menorah would later be immortalized in stone on the Arch of Titus in Rome, a trophy of conquest." But this was not just a military or cultural loss, it was theological devastation. With the altar gone, the sacrificial system, central to atonement, ceased. This is what the book of Leviticus 17 verse 11 says: "For the life of the flesh is in the blood. It is the blood that makes atonement for the soul." Following that, the Levitical priesthood, established in Exodus 28, lost its sanctuary, its function, and its reason for being. The very heart of Israel's covenantal identity, the visible presence of God among his people, was gone. The temple had fallen, the world of ancient Judaism had shattered. The question now loomed, what would take its place? Without sacrifices, how is sin atoned for? Without priests, who mediates between man and God? Without the temple, what anchors the covenant itself? The law had been clear. Worship was to take place at the one sanctuary God would choose. But you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose, and there you shall bring your offerings and sacrifices. Deuteronomy 12, verses 5 to 6. From this devastation, a new direction quietly emerged, led not by priests, but by teachers. One name stands out, Yohanan ben Zakkai, a respected Pharisaic sage. As the Roman siege tightened around Jerusalem, ben Zakkai, seeing that the temple would fall, devised a daring escape. According to Talmud Gittin 56b, he feigned death and was smuggled out of the city in a coffin by his disciples. Once outside, he was brought before the Roman general Vespasian, soon to become emperor. There, ben Zakkai made a request, not for military aid or the preservation of the temple, but for something entirely different. Give me Yavne and its sages. It was a quiet but strategic move. Yavne, a coastal town west of Jerusalem, became the birthplace of what would eventually be known as Rabbinic Judaism. In Yavne, ben Zakkai and other Pharisaic scholars began reconstructing Jewish religious life, not around sacrifice, but around study. Prayer took the place of offerings. Torah study replaced ritual observance in the temple. The rabbi emerged as the new spiritual authority, interpreting the law, leading synagogues, guiding the community. Most significantly, the Oral Torah, a body of traditions believed by the Pharisees to have been passed down alongside the written Torah, began to take center stage. They claimed this oral tradition had originated with Moses, passed to Joshua, then to the elders, the prophets, and eventually to the rabbis themselves. This claim is recorded in Pirkei Avot 1 verse 1. For centuries, this oral tradition remained unwritten, fluid, evolving, debated in academies. But by around 200 AD, in response to fear of losing it, it was compiled and codified into the Mishnah, the foundational text of Rabbinic Judaism. This new form of Judaism no longer required a temple. Its center was no longer Jerusalem, but the text. Its leaders were no longer priests, but rabbis, and its worship no longer required blood, but words. The transformation was radical, quiet, but profound. What had been a sacrificial, priestly, temple-bound religion was now being reshaped into something portable, adaptable, and very different from the faith described in the Torah. Was this a preservation of Moses' faith, or the beginning of something entirely new? That question still echoes through history. One might think, when all these things happened, where were the followers of Jesus? You see, while the Jewish world reeled from the loss of the temple, early Christians saw the event not as a catastrophe, but as a divine confirmation. Decades earlier, Jesus had stood with his disciples overlooking the splendor of Herod's temple and uttered a stunning prophecy. Do you see all these things? Truly, I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. Matthew 24, verse 2. And so it was. In 70 AD, the temple fell, just as he had said. But Jesus had also said something more mysterious. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. John 2, verse 19. The Gospel tells us he was speaking of his own body. In Christian theology, the destruction of the temple marked the end of the Old Covenant system, a system of repeated sacrifices, ritual purity, and Levitical mediation. In its place stood Christ, the final high priest and the once-for-all sacrifice for sin. As the book of Hebrews proclaims, every priest stands daily ministering, but this man, after offering one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of God. Hebrews 10 verses 11 to 12. The contrast could not be clearer. Rabbinic Judaism rebuilt itself around the Torah, the rabbi, and rigorous study. Christianity centered itself on Christ, the cross, and the unmerited grace of God. While Rabbinic Judaism developed a system to preserve faith without the temple, Christians believed that the temple had already served its purpose and was no longer needed. The early church fathers saw the fall of the temple as more than a historical tragedy. To them, it was divine testimony. Justin Martyr, writing in the 2nd century, interpreted its destruction as judgment, and the clear sign that the new covenant in Christ had fully replaced the old. For Christians, the temple's ruins stood as a monument to a fulfilled promise. The curtain had been torn. The way to God was opened, not through a building, but through a person. Two faiths, two paths, one turning point in history. Judaism lost its temple. The priests were scattered. The sacrifices ceased. But from the ashes, Rabbinic Judaism arose, centered not on the altar, but on the authority of the rabbis and the study of law. Meanwhile, Christianity saw not loss, but fulfillment. The temple system had done its work. The Messiah had come. A new covenant had been sealed, not with the blood of animals, but with the blood of Christ. As the writer of Hebrews puts it, Christ entered a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands. Hebrews 9 verse 11. So we are left with questions worth pondering. Did Rabbinic Judaism preserve the faith of Moses or reshape it out of necessity? What does the fall of the temple truly reveal about God's plan? And how does this deepen our understanding of the new covenant Christ inaugurated? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Also, please like and share it. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.